Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and a Merry Christmas to you all. As always, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to one of two episodes of Ace in a Day gameplay today for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In our first one, we're going to be reviewing the newly arrived Heinkel HE100 D-1, the German fighter aircraft coming at a tier of 2 and a battle rated of 1.7. To provide you with a brief historical overview as to the HE100 in general and this particular subvariant, we begin thus. In the autumn of 1937, the Luftwaffe's Technischer Amt Technical Office were looking into a successor for the Bf-109. Spurred on by the rejection of the HE-112 design for the Bf-109 in the autumn of 1936, Ernst Heinkel and Heinrich Hertel were determined to provide said successor, rather than just focus on developing bomber aircraft. They had already started work on the design as Project 1035 prior to the Luftwaffe's requirement, embodying the lessons learnt from the Heinkel HE-112 and most importantly from that, reducing the number of man-hours required to produce said aircraft, and also the lessons learnt from the Bf-109, i.e. adopting a wide-track, inward-retracting undercarriage, the opposite of the much criticised narrow-track, outward-retracting undercarriage of the Bf-109. The intention was to produce the most aerodynamically clean fighter of its generation. The design was to be powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601A liquid-cooled inverted V12 engine, with the engine cowling tailored specifically for the engine. A unique feature of the design was that it could accommodate one of two wings, the first being a larger set of wings spanning 30 feet and 10 3/4 inches or 9.4 metres and having a surface area of 155 square feet or 14.4 metres squared. The second type of wings were smaller, spanning 24 feet and 11 1/4 inches or 7.6 metres and having a surface area of 118.4 square feet, 11 metres squared. The larger wings were for the standard production fighter, the smaller wings would be for an attempt at the ultimate speed record for a fighter aircraft. The design was completed on the 25th of May 1937 and by October of that year the design was designated HE100, with a contract for 3 prototypes and 10 pre-production examples being issued to Heinkel. The first test flight, conducted using HE100V1 on the 22nd of January 1938, revealed an unexpected issue. The surface evaporation cooling system led to a huge temperature gradient between the wing's undersurfaces and upper surfaces, badly straining the airframe in flight. This was resolved by increasing the gauge of the wing stress skinning, along with the cooling surface area in general for the V2 airframe. Test flights continued therefore in March of 1938, and based on the V2's performance, an attempt was soon made on the 100 km closed speed circuit record using the V2 on the 6th of June 1938. The plane was flown by General Major Udet at 18,000 feet, or 5,486 metres altitude, at which the plane established a new record of 394.4 miles per hour, or 635 kilometres an hour. However, when it was announced that the plane had broken the record, the plane was designated HE112U, with the U standing for the pilot, i.e. Udet, and all photos of the plane were withdrawn from publication. This was done to increase the chances of the Heinkel 112 being procured by nations as part of the export market. In September of 1938, the V3 airframe was used in an attempt to break the world airspeed record for the time. Unfortunately, during takeoff, one of the main wheel gear legs failed to retract, meaning the record attempt had to be aborted. Soon after, the V4 and V5 airframes followed and saw some structural improvements. These were the first pre-production planes. The V6 airframe appeared in March of 1939, fielding the uprated DB601A engine. The V7 airframe arrived in May of 1939 with an improved heat exchanger for the plane's oil system. The V8 airframe, completed prior to the V6 and the V7 airframes interestingly enough in early 1939, was the second airframe put together in order to try and break the world airspeed record. The attempt was made on the 30th of March 1939, and the plane secured the record with an average speed of 463.92 miles per hour, or in English 746.6 kilometers an hour. Messerschmitt soon took the record with the Me-209V1 airframe on the 26th of April 1939, recording an average speed of 469.22 miles per hour, or 755.1 kilometers an hour. Heinkel personally believed that the HE100 V8 airframe could take the record back when flying under similar temperature conditions to those that the Me-209 flew in, but was told by the Luftwaffe on the 12th of July 1939 to cease all efforts in breaking the record any further. Meanwhile, in the summer of 1939, the V-9 airframe flew for the first time, armed with an engine-mounted 20mm MG-FF cannon and two 7.92mm MG-17 machine guns mounted in the wing roots. This armament was to be standardised on the last three aircraft in the initial production order, designated as Heinkel HE-100 D-0s. With the test programme of the D-0 aircraft underway in September of 1939, production of the first 12 D-1s was initiated. The D-0 was to feature a redesigned windscreen and also an arched one-piece sliding canopy for the pilot. Both the Soviet Union and the Imperial Japanese Navy showed great interest in the aircraft, i.e. the D-0, whereby the Soviets were interested in the plane's surface evaporative cooling system, a similar system being used on their own experimental I-21 fighter. They requested 3 HE-100 D-1 airframes to be delivered, these being delivered in the winter going from 1939 to 1940. Japan meanwhile purchased the 3 completed HE-100 D-0 airframes and a manufacturing licence to go with them. The fighters were to arrive in Japan in May 1940 and were designated AXHEL. Japan was so impressed by the plane's performance that it was intended that the plane would become their standard land-based interceptor fighter. But this was to never materialise, however, due to the development of the Second World War, with Heinkel being unable to provide the tools Japan needed to make this a reality. Powered by the same Daimler-Benz DB601 AA V12 liquid-cooled 1175 horsepower engine as the D-0, the D-1 differed from the D-0 in being redesigned in terms of its horizontal tail surfaces with an increased aspect ratio. The plane was able to reach a top speed of 416 miles per hour, or 669 kilometers an hour, at 16,400 feet altitude, or 5,000 meters approximately. The plane only ever saw service as a hoax fighter, whereby it was used to convince Allied intelligence in 1940 that the plane was in widespread use with the Luftwaffe under the designation of the Heinkel HE-113. The plane never saw combat service. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the HE-100 D-1 handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. Today's gameplay is brought to you on the Ground Strike map, Top of the World. For this we'll be using the following setup. Universal belts for our machine guns, reasoning being these belts provide us with the combination of being able to see where our rounds are going, thanks to the singular armour-piercing tracer round, and on top of this a good amount of damage output in terms of the singular armour-piercing, adjustment incendiary, and armour-piercing incendiary rounds, with the latter two also enabling us to set our foes on fire and cause them to burn to death. We need the visibility of where our rounds are going, simply because with our lower calibre ammunition we're going to need to put in a lot of rounds on average in order to bring our foes down, i.e. 3 to 4 second bursts against a fighter, if not longer, and extending that even further against enemy bombers. On top of this we're using a gun convergence of 300 meters, reasoning being that the limited range of our machine guns due to the lower calibre and therefore lower muzzle velocity means that we only have a maximum range of approximately 550 meters. We intend to engage our foes at 400 meters or less, and a 300 meter gun convergence will complement this. Finally, for our fuel load, we're using the standard 30-minute fuel load to make it to the end of the game, unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis of the Heinkel HE-100 D-1 then, known as the D-1 from here on in, by taking a look at its climb rate. The climb rate of this aircraft for its battle rating and tier is exceptional, and if not the best compared to its contemporaries, is amongst the best and equaling its rivals, whereby this plane can quickly ascend from say 2,000 meters altitude up to 4,000 meters altitude as depicted at the start of this match with no bother. Once it has levelled out, it can accelerate from a low speed, i.e. all the way down to its stall speed of 120 km an hour, up to 475 km an hour on its engine power alone very quickly. Meaning that we're prepared to take on this TBD-1 Devastator here and rip them apart for our first kill. They seemed oblivious not to go into the head-on pass, but still we'll take what we can get this Christmas. Carrying our momentum through, we now go for an enemy Wellington, and once again show how strong the acceleration of this aircraft is, whereby if you bring your more emergency power, you can extend your acceleration threshold up to 525 km an hour before your acceleration drops off noticeably. Now note here how we take a significant amount of damage from the rear facing turrets of the Wellington, if not just the singular turret, whereby the airframe of the D-1 is not very strong, and as a result this plane can quickly succumb to even the lightest of return fire from an enemy bomber, let alone direct fire from an enemy fighter. And if you are going up against the likes of say a lag-free of its 20mm cannon, one or two 20mm cannon rounds are all it takes to cause this plane to burst into pieces, if not catch fire and burn to death very quickly. So you need to be cautious about taking hits, which is why bomber hunting this aircraft is actually one of the weaker aspects. A, because of the lack of durability, and secondly, as you may have already guessed, the overall armament. Now why it has been decided as to this plane having 3 7.92mm MG17 machine guns rather than 2 of these machine guns and in a singular 20mm MG-FF cannon firing through the propeller hub, I am unsure. I am not going to question it. We can just see the difference between the version implemented in game and that we discussed historically. But with your 3 machine guns, you'll find that your overall damage output is more constrained to the longer term, i.e. having that extended burst on your foe rather than that quick burst you can get off in a single second to bring down your foe. Therefore you need to set your opponents up to have maximum time on target, much like in the Messerschmitt 109E1 with its 4 7.92mm machine guns. We close in on the Wellington here on the beam as they begin to climb up in order to try and extend the time they have to get their return fire on us before levelling out and then going into a gradual dive. And we use the same tactics as before, looping over for our second pass, coming directly down on top of the Wellington here and cutting it close towards their tail section, killing off one of their gunners. We then rinse and repeat, coming out to the right hand side before looping over. A third pass should be able to kill off all the cabin crew and finish the plane. We open fire, continuing a sustained burst here, and we should take note that we have maxed out weapon maintenance allowing us to fire for so long on our pilot, and therefore we pick up our third kill. Now it's 2 bombers down, we're not going to challenge our fate at this point or indeed run our luck and try and bring down a third bomber if it appears. We've done more than enough. So what this goes to show is that the D-1 can act as a bomber interceptor. It has the climb rate, the acceleration and the overall tenacity if required to bring down bombers, i.e. you can be aggressive in this plane and you can bring down bombers over longer periods of time. But outside of attacking bombers, where else does this plane perform well? Well, it is not the most manoeuvrable planes for turn fighting, we'll come back to that shortly, so instead we're going to opt for a boom and zoom pass here. Now whilst we do not hit our maximum dive speed of 895 km/h in this boom and zoom dive pass, we can see how the plane built up its speed very rapidly, i.e. its acceleration in a dive, and with its great overall energy retention, even though we made a rather sharp manoeuvre there to avoid crashing into our foe, i.e. the B-36G Hawk, and indeed our allies burning out of the sky. And then we make a quick snap to the side to dodge the incoming fire of a Junkers 87R2, who we sprayed some fire at in the head-on. We've still retained a good amount of our speed, coming out of our pass at 540 km/h approximately, and we now begin to climb back up to altitude once more. Therefore, the D-1 is a very difficult plane for foes to catch when it is going through in a boom and zoom pass, i.e. cutting through multiple furballs. The likes of the planes that perform well at low altitude, such as the Lag-3, the Yak-1 to name your Russian counterparts, and indeed planes that perform well generally at lower altitudes, such as the P-36 Hawk and the F-2A Buffalo, and the Hurricane Mark 1 will not be able to keep up with this plane. And on top of that, what one must factor is that the majority of your opponents do not have the same top speeds as you. The stat card of this aircraft lists the top speed of the plane, if I remember correctly, at 707 km/h. And whilst we not typically quote stat cards, it really does feel as though in this plane that this plane can go incredibly fast. We've already said that the maximum dive speed of this aircraft is very close to 900 km/h. Its acceleration in a straight line is phenomenal, we've already articulated that. In a dive, it's great. And on top of that, with its climb rate being phenomenal, this means that this plane can zip about the battlefield before anyone can put a finger on it. And we're seeing this here. We've come out of boom and zoom pass and we're already back up to, in the midst of a climb, just over 2,800 metres altitude. Now most aircraft at a battle rating of 1.7 in a tier 2, you would not see this. The only other plane you may see this in would be the likes of say a Messerschmitt 19ML1. So really, does it become the case of that plane being your equivalent? Well, there are some noticeable differences in terms of the handling characteristics of the two aircraft, and we'll come on to that now as we begin to discuss the manoeuvrability of the D-1 here. The manoeuvrability of this aircraft is such that it will not give you the confidence to turn fight with the majority of your opposition. You would have to expect that whilst not depicted on screen here, because we're playing at a battle rating of 2.3, we set ourselves up that way, the majority of your foes will be biplanes or very early monoplanes with tighter turn circles and less favourable boom and zoom characteristics. Therefore, the majority of your opposition will be turn fighters, but when you go to a battle rate and a 2.3, you start to see the likes of the Ki-44 and the Yak-1 appear, and every so often a P-47 Thunderbolt, so you get to see that mixture of foes. Therefore, when you go into an engagement, i.e. a 1 versus 1 turn fight, the D-1 has a rather wide turn circle, practically the same as the likes of a Messerschmitt 109 ML1, meaning this plane is not going to outturn the likes of a P-36 Hawk, a Yak-1, a Spitfire Mark 1 or a Hurricane Mark 1. There will be very few foes you can actually outturn, especially at lower speeds, i.e. in your ideal speed range of approximately 300 to 575 km an hour, you'll find that this plane does turn quite quickly, but not as fast as say the likes of a Hurricane Mark 1 in its ideal speed range of 200 to 350 km an hour. And indeed at lower altitudes you lose a chunk of your performance, but more on that in a second as we swoop around here very quickly on a Messerschmitt 109 ML4. And whilst we do get a lot of hits into their fuselage, because of its overall sturdiness and indeed the armour attributed to that plane, we're not able to bring them down. Instead we brake directly upwards, maximising the performance of our engine here and indeed our energy advantage on our foe, and we get ready to counter them once again. So if the turn circle of this plane is quite wide in general, what about the control surfaces as a whole, i.e. the 3 dimensions? Well, your weakest control surface is your elevator. The elevator feels rather sluggish on this aircraft, not to the point where you're going to struggle to pull up, but to the point where performing tight loops in this aircraft is a no-go. The likes of the P-36 Hawk will have you beat by a significant margin, and that extends through to the likes of an F-2A Buffalo, and on top of that, the Spitfires and the Hurricanes you'll encounter. As we go head to head with a Spitfire Mark 1 here, completely missing all of our shots in the head on and breaking over the top. But outside of that, your rudder is quite nice, and we're seeing this here as we hammer head over the top of the Spitfire. Flattening out, just making sure to bleed out all of their energy here as we force them into a complete stall, and then swing around once again on our rudder, cut our engine sufficiently and line up the shot on their cockpit, picking up our 4th kill. So with the rudder being good, the best set of controls on this plane would have to be the ailerons, i.e. your roll rate. Now your roll rate is not the best. That title for monoplanes at your battle rate and tier approximately will go to the likes of say an I-16 or a Lag 3. But you have a very sturdy roll rate, and it means you can change your direction on the fly very quickly, and if you do end up going up against a more manoeuvrable foe in terms of them having the better turn circle, you can perhaps evade them by simply using your roll rate to change up the directionality of the fight. We switch targets here to a Heinkel 112B0, but we can't get a clean shot, we're coming in too fast, and we switch targets too late. Then we try to snap onto this Lag 3 here, getting a couple of sprays on the Lag 323, and fortunately one of our incendiary rounds, whether it's the adjustment incendiary or the armour piercing incendiary, goes in, sets them on fire, and gives us our ace in a day. Your roll rate then is probably your best control surface as we've articulated, allowing you to snap into different directions on call, and therefore evade those foes who do get on your 6 when you're not able to run away straight away. But what about your control surfaces at higher speeds? Do they have lock-up thresholds? Well, in the case of your elevator, this control surface does not lock up whatsoever regardless of speed. However, in the case of your rudder, it's a very interesting one because it's a very sudden lock-up, whereby you lose 75% of your rudder's performance, going from 675 km an hour to 700 km an hour, and your roll rate drops to only 25% of standard when going from 650 km an hour to 850 km an hour, so a rather gradual drop-off, but a noticeable one at that. But again, when you're going into those boom and zoom passes, if you set yourself up accordingly for more gentle attack runs, whereby you can maximise your time to build your speed and select your targets, not demonstrated today perhaps, then as a result you'll be able to maximise your effectiveness in those boom and zoom passes and not feel the effects of your rather high, if non-existent, lock-up thresholds for the speed you'll be doing on average. And with that, let's take a look at the post-game stats. With our 5 kills, we're able to pick up 12,870 silver lions and 2,416 research points. To defeat the D-1 in a given matchup, I can recommend one or two approaches. The first is to tackle it in a turn fight, whereby if you can keep this turn fight below 2,000 meters altitude, you'll be giving yourself a bonus, for 2 reasons. Firstly, the D-1 loses a small chunk of its engine's performance below 2,000 meters altitude, whereby you'll put it outside of its ideal altitude range of 2,500 to 6,000 meters, and at the other end of the spectrum it loses some performance above 7,000 meters altitude, very gradually, but you'll not typically see that altitude for your battle rate and tier. But coming back to the point, the second reason is that you take away the ability for the D1 pilot when they feel threatened to just dive away from you and use their raw pace to escape you. Then when you're in this turn fight, as well as having the superior turn circle, you'll typically have the greater manoeuvrability across all three control surface domains, especially in monoplanes such as the I-16, the P-36A Hawk, the F-2A Buffalo and the Hurricane Mark 1, and all the biplanes that you can encounter this aircraft in. Then, as a last resort, the D1 pilot may try to go dead vertical using their engine power and climb rate to force you to stall out in their wake. But you will typically have the lower stall speeds, around the 100km mark if not lower, compared to the stall speed of 120km now for the D1, and the fact that the plane feels its stall characteristics as early as 150km an hour. The second approach is to engage this aircraft in a head-on pass, particularly if you have centre-mounted armament of 12.7mm calibre or higher. Therefore, you'll have double the range of the 7.92mm machine guns in the HE-100, and on top of this, you'll be able to cut it apart very quickly thanks to its lack of overall durability. Planes such as the Lag-3 will excel in this regard. But by avoiding these two situations today, we've hopefully depicted the HE-100 D1 as a very fast fighter for its battle rate and tier, if not the fastest, whereby this plane has the ability to zip around the battlefield, harassing foes as it goes, whether it be enemy bombers in an interceptor role or enemy fighters down low in more of a boom and zoom role. You never ideally want to turn fight in this aircraft, despite the fact it does have some manoeuvrability to keep it alive, and whenever you feel threatened you have the ability to use your pace to get away, whether it be in a straight line or diving away or going vertical on your foes, so long as you manage the engagement accordingly. Therefore, going alongside its historical nature, we can say that the HE-100 D1 is a record breaker, as it is a very fast aircraft, and on top of that it's going to require a record-breaking amount of ammunition in most cases to bring down its foes. With that, I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. And be sure to tune in to our other Christmas special where we review the Junkers 88 C6. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.